Okay, so my coworker called me and said, I've got this generator. I've used it a few times, but not very frequently. Problem is, we tried to start it up the other day. It started up, ran for a minute, and died. Not sure why, but they tried to pull, nothing happened. So she called me and said, hey, can you come over and take a look at it? I said, do you mind if I take it back to the garage? I'll tear it apart, figure out what I can do, and get it back to you. So we're going to do a little walkthrough to figure out what's going on with this generator and hopefully identify easy fix areas so that other folks won't run into this. So we're going to do a walkthrough, step by step, figure out what's going on. First things first, check. There is some fuel in there. Not a lot. Smells a little old, not completely varnished. The float's not that bad. So I assume it's getting fuel. Check the oil. It's about halfway up the dipstick hash marks, so we're okay there. It's kind of neat. It's got this removable gas tank, so if you have to go to the station and go get it filled up, unhook that, quick release, take it over to the station rather than trying to pour one of the Mr. Spillet modern gas cans we have out there. This has one of the on-off switches for the fuel over here. So I checked that earlier. It's on the on setting now. It has an on-off switch here to activate and deactivate the magneto. The choke is on, so we're just going to give it a few pulls and see if it goes anywhere. Oh, you know what? The garage door's shut. Let's not choke ourselves out. There we go. Get a little fresh air flow through here if it does start up. All right, try this again. Okay, 5 pulls and we don't hear anything. It doesn't even start to stumble over. We're gonna go ahead and pull the air cover off and see if there's something behind there. Maybe hit it with some go-go juice and see if it will at least trip over there. So it's a flathead screwdriver, 2 screws, relatively easy. A lot of the times, if you let them sit with fuel in them, that poor, cheap generator will not work like you want it to, because the even cheaper carburetor is dead. It's gummed up. Either the needle is stuck or the jets are plugged, and it just will not pick up fuel and get it where it needs to be. And if you don't have spark, fuel, or air, you're not going to have combustion. Alright. Air filter looks pretty good. It's nice and clean. Doesn't look like it has a lot of hours on it. It's really clean inside here. The choke fully activates. Give you guys a look at this. So getting down in here, you can see that paper filter doesn't look too bad. A little dirty, but just a couple hours on it. There's not a lot of signs of any oil coming back, so there's not blow-by coming back through the carburetor. Nothing's gumming up. You can see the choke plate moving in there. So that's a good sign. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can't hit it with some go juice in the form of some starting fluid. Give it a couple shots and see if that wakes it up a little bit here. You don't need a lot, because all we're doing is trying to trigger to see if it wants to wake up. Okay, well that's a good sign. It started on that first pull with some engine starting fluid, that probably means that it's a fueling issue altogether. We'll shoot a little more starting fluid down that carb, see if we can get it run for more than just a quick turnover. Okay, yep. It's running off the starting fluid and only the starting fluid. That tells me something inside that carburetor is not happy. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to pull these two nuts off, and they look to be about 10 millimeter. We'll get this cover plate off and get some of this action out of the way in the front of the carburetor. The carburetor itself is hidden back behind it just a little bit. They're pretty accessible, not too hard to get to. Let's see what we can do. What we've got is the front face of the carburetor. Right in here. So operate that choke lever. That opens it up, closes it. What you see here, this is indicative of these types of carburetors. We have half the gasket here. The other half is stuck to the back of that plate. Look at that. Just stuck right to the back of that plate. Even if this was running, I know it's not on the engine side, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but with that broken, that tells me it's not going to run smooth. So in the long run, we'll probably replace this gasket. They sell rebuild kits for these carburetors. We'll get that gasket fixed, and we'll see what we can do to get that sealed back up. Worst comes to worst, we can put some RTV on there. Now should be a drain on the bottom of the carburetor. It looks a little hard to get to because this protective plate's in the way. I want to see, is it getting fluid at all? We can get to the fuel line here. Get a pair of pliers. I'm going to shut the fuel off. The last thing I really want is a bunch of fuel pouring out uncontrolled. I'd rather control it with that fuel control valve. Main on-off switch right here. Up says off. You really can't read it because it's kind of buried. Up's off. If it's flipped this way, it's on. We'll turn it off for a minute. It has a little fuel filter in line. That looks like we can pop it apart. Check the status of this fuel line. I might not even need to get the pliers out, so we'll do this. There's that fuel line. So let's see if we can catch some fuel in here. We'll turn the valve back on, see if it dumps any fuel. Hopefully this isn't a check valve or a leak prevention valve. Man, they bury that on-off switch really well. I feel bad for anybody that's really got to operate that thing. That might have to have that connected in order to have any fuel flow out so it doesn't leak, doesn't drain out. I'm trying to protect Gary homeowner in case that thing comes out that they're not going to have a fuel leak and potentially have a fire. So we'll connect it back up here, and we'll disconnect the fuel line right down there. Try and see what we can do. Of course, everything's in the worst gosh darn position. And these little clips, all you got to do is squeeze them. Squeeze the tangs together and it comes up out of the way, theoretically. But given the confined quarters we're operating in, and knocking over my flashlight every 5 seconds, Now the magnetic part of my flashlight's catching all the fuels. This inaugural run of the video fun was nice and interesting. Squeeze it and get it up in there. We can get that fuel line off. There we go. See, coax it up, squeeze it a couple more times, and work that clamp off of the. Basically, you just need to get it clear of where that tube is. Fuel still off. Slide that fuel line right off top of the carburetor. Get a few drips, so it looks like we're getting fuel flow through there. We'll go ahead and turn it on. See if we get fuel flow coming all together. It's a big negatory. You know what? Let me give her another splash of gas and see if it's just because it's too low in the tank. All right, bear with me here. All right, we're gonna pull this line off. We'll drain it down in the bowl. Something to catch it with. Turn that on. We are not getting anything out of this fuel line. So, nothing whatsoever. It's not even dripping. And I know we're over the level of that fill. Oh! Check that out. It worked when I opened the tank. When I opened the lid on the tank. Wonder if this has an air bleed on it. Bet it does. I bet it's supposed to operate with a bleed valve on the top opened a little bit, and it was pressurizing, negatively pressurizing that tank to the point where it's never going to start because it's not going to let any fuel through. Alright, so get that fuel line back on there. It's got this little screw up here at the top of the filler cap. I'm theorizing that's a bleed valve, air bleed valve. Closed. Hooked our fuel line back up. Let's go ahead and crack that sucker open. Give it a second, see if it's going to fill the bowl. Give it a little go juice. See if it starts off of the go juice and stays running with some gas here. Switch is still in the on position. A little bit of go. It just smells like ether. Let's go ahead and open that up all the way. Still nothing. I'll hit it with a little more happy juice. So all I'm smelling is the ether. When it starts up, it kicks back off. But with that cap off, it should be flowing some fuel down through. Because that, yeah, I'm getting a little bit coming through. I'm getting a good steady flow. I wonder if that carb is still gummed up and stuck. Okay, so I went ahead and popped this cover off that is covering the side of the carburetor and underneath it. So I thought, okay, maybe I can easily get underneath there and hit that drain valve. It's usually just a screw or a hex head nut. Loosen it up and you can drain out through the bottom of the carburetor. That's usually how the bowl's held on, but I did see the bowl's held on with a couple screws. Wouldn't you believe it? Get in underneath there. There is no drain in that carburetor. I guess they just want you to run that thing dry come the end of the season. And I'm suspecting there's something going on in that bowl that's telling us we're not going to have any fuel. So, I'll pop that line back off. catch anything we get down in there. We'll catch a bull. We're going to take these off. They're a reverse star head, so it's not like a star bit that you can get in there on with just a star bit. So I'm going to take a look at that. I might just have it get a pair of vice grips on there and back that out. If I don't have a 6-point socket to get on there, a really small one too. Again, not the most serviceable, user serviceable parts in the world. Let me dig through the tool chest and see what I got. Alright, wouldn't you know it, dig through the collection just a little bit, and I found what we're looking for. Get this flashlight out of your face. Put it in mine a little bit. It's 5/32 bit. 6-point. Back those out. Small, so it doesn't want to release too much. And you don't want to put too much torque on these things and pop them hard, but the impact is nice to break them just loose. Sometimes they have a little Loctite on them from the factory. And all it is a nice long stud. Pull those off. Gently wiggle that carb, it should pop right off. And hopefully, yeah, we're not going to destroy that gasket back there like the first one ripped apart. Now what we have connected, bring it back in here, we have your idle spring that keeps it from over revving, and you have your throttle lever. They're just through these two little holes. You just pull your idle spring up out of that hole, and you'll see the idle, it's got a little hook on the end of it. So we'll just wiggle that off, and we're getting some fuel spill, so I suspect there's some stuff down in that carb. Pour that out into that little bowl there. And there's our carburetor. Right there. Not serviceable, no, not user friendly. But we'll go ahead and go over to the bench, and we'll see if we can pop it open, especially look inside here. Alright, so after some cursing and swearing off camera, what I found out is these screws that hold the bowl on, I think they're Loctited 7 ways to Sunday, and they're never going to come out with regular coaxing. So I really don't feel like stripping them out. What we're going to do is we're going to do a couple tests. Basically, let me grab an old carburetor here I can show you. Walk you through what we're looking at. Alright, so I did some cursing and swearing off camera. What I've basically found out is these screws that are on the bottom of the bowl of this carburetor don't really look like they're user serviceable. They're probably Loctited in there, tighter than anything I've ever seen. And I really don't feel like stripping them out or breaking them and damaging this entire carburetor. Looking at some of the other stuff, there's yellow on this one. You can see some Loctite on some of the other fittings in here. So I'm going to guess that they really don't want you working on this thing. So I'm going to walk through. I've got an older carburetor that, very similar. Very, very similar unit. So, front face is a little smaller because it's from a smaller tool. Yes, front face with a choke. Choke operates the same way. Open it up, close. Lets air in or out. Throttle plate side, lets more air in or out. This one, fuel comes in here, as opposed to this one, the fuel comes in on this side. But I'm going to walk you through the basic operation here, and what I was hoping to see on the bottom of this one, where this blank is, was this guy. This little nut. Take that off on most carburetors, most small engine carburetors, and you take the bowl off. Sometimes, like this one, had some junk in it, but it has this float system in it. So imagine you got the bowl here, and fuel comes in this tube on the side, and it flows down into the bowl. Well, it's only going to float down into the bowl when the valve in here says it's okay. The valve is attached to the back of this float. So when the float's down, in other words, there's no fuel in the bottom of this bowl, the float's down and fuel comes in. As the fuel comes in, this little plastic float will float up and push the valve closed. And once it's closed, it stops flowing fuel. And as the engine runs, it'll suck fuel out, that float will open up, it'll fill up with more fuel, and it'll start up all over again. Refill the carburetor bowl over and over again. And you have a little tiny valve seat and valve. So and this guy's up here on the top, and you gotta imagine that as that float goes up and down, this opens up just a little bit and presses against that little tiny rubber valve seat that you can barely see inside my fingers. So, you know, that plastic float goes down, it opens up, and it lets fuel in. Plastic float floats up as it fills up, and it goes back against the seat and closes off. So what we want to see is, let me demonstrate that a little bit better here. Pliers. Just pull this pin out. I've had this carburetor out and apart a dozen times, and don't want to lose that pin. It's handy. You see it right here on this float. As I lift it out, oh, you see the needle right there on the back? There's your needle. And it goes down inside that little tube right there where it presses against the seat. Alright. And that allows your fuel to go into your bowl, up and down, so that you can keep fuel going in. Since I can't get the bottom of this other carburetor apart, I want to try to think about how do I get a check in there to see if I'm getting fuel. Well, if it's empty, which it should be because I emptied it out, drained it into my bowl here, and had it tipped over about 1,000 times trying to get it apart, there's no more fuel. And if you shake it, you can hear that float moving up and down. But what I don't know, is that needle stuck, or is that seat stuck, or is there something gummed up in there? So, easy solution, and I'm going to get my air gun gently, because if you hit it hard, you will blow that little tiny seat out of place, and then you're SOL. So just gently, I want to see, do I hear, can I feel air coming out of anywhere else in the carb? Can I feel it coming back out? And I think I can. Alright, because that bowl's down, so it should be letting fuel into that carburetor. Yep. I can hear it coming out of other places. You hear it whistling? It's coming out of those little holes in the middle. So, oh, there's the Mrs. Pizza. Gotta make sure I keep her pizza ready. So air is coming out of those holes right there in the middle. Get that light in here. There's that tube right down there in the middle. You see that? That's where the fuel comes up and out of the bowl and shoots down the throttle and down through the body of the carburetor and into your engine. Gives your engine its happy juice. So I was hearing some air coming out of those. So that means that float's working. Now, why is fuel not coming out of the tube, out of the fill tube, getting into here, up and out? I'm gonna have to rack my head about that. Meantime, it's time for some pizza. Okay, so it's been a few days, and I had to step away from this project. Back when I was a lot younger, my grandfather taught me an old trick that I've lived with to this day. If you get pissed off at a project, walk away. If it's frustrating you, walk away. If you need to
look at it from a different perspective, walk away. The project's not going anywhere. Chances are, if the more frustrated you get, the more angry you get at it, you're gonna break something. So as I was tearing this guy apart, trying to tear this guy apart, I'm realizing more and more this is a non-serviceable carburetor. There's just parts in here that you can't clean out well. Like you can't take the primary jet out. It's in there without damaging it. It's not made to be cleaned, not made to be serviced. It's meant to be replaced. So in that vein, I went out to Amazon, and for 20 bucks, I got a replacement. Now it's got the choke tube already mounted on the top. It's 99.9% the same. Everything's there. It matches up pretty well. Still dripping a little bit here, but you know, for 20 bucks, it was worth getting a replacement. And it wasn't just the carb. So get some fuel line, get some gaskets and some miscellaneous parts. You can replace the springs, you can replace the throttle lever, choke levers, depending on your exact application. There's all the gaskets for it, including the ones that had worn out. There's some additional gaskets for inside of places on the carburetor. A new shutoff, a new fuel filter, a new spark plug, a new foam filter for the air filter system, and a new air filter. So for 20 bucks, you get an entire tune-up kit for this thing. There's another carb adjustment or a choke adjustment tool, depending on your application. But for 20 bucks, you get the entire kit, entire setup. And so it's really hard to beat that. So sometimes you gotta look at it and say, well, how much time, how much energy should I spend on this? And when we were breaking it down, when we were going through all of what we thought was the potential issues, we were able to get this thing to fire over on gas down the throat of the carb. And it would fire over for a minute and then it would die out. We could run it on ether, on the starting fluid, and it would keep running. The problem is you keep doing that and it washes down the cylinder walls, and the ether displaces all the oil that the two-stroke engine soaks up. So as you spray more ether, it washes down the oil, and you basically end up with a cylinder wall that's getting no lubrication, and it's going to burn up. It will burn up. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So this is short-term stuff. Do not use this in the long term. Don't try to keep the engine running for a long time on this. If you're running more than 15, 20 seconds trying to get an engine running and running on ether, you're running it too long, because you're running without lubrication, without proper lubrication. So don't do it. Just don't do it. But we could get it running with gas down the throat of the carb, hooked up. So that said, there's something going on with this old carb. But again, because it's not very user serviceable, and it looks to be a rather cheap part, considering we got the entire replacement set up for 20 bucks on Amazon. It showed up a couple days ago, and this is the first chance I've got to really attack it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go and we're gonna replace all these parts. It's just smart, that I'm not sure how old that generator is. My buddy's had it for, I don't know, probably 10 years. And so stuff like fuel line is ready to be replaced. Do we have to replace the shutoff switch? No, probably not. That might just go into the collection. I don't even see a fuel filter on there, so it might be smart to put a fuel filter on there. We're going to replace that plug. These other levers and the bar and the spring, they're probably not necessary to replace. Filters, yes, we're going to replace filters. Okay, so we're going to shift gears. We're going to move over to the ground and over to see the generator. We're going to go from there. All right, so here we are. We're back with our generator. I moved it around, got it around the garage because got kids. They want to get their bikes and skateboards in and out. This platform that I use is actually a skateboard platform I built for one of the boys. Maybe I'll go through building another one of these days. It was really easy. We're going to take this tank back off for accessibility. We're going to replace the spark plug. And a lot of the other consumable parts. So we can get this thing ready and running. So if or when the power does go out for our friend, they're able to fire it up and have a reliable generator to give them some backup power for the house. Now, one of the things I didn't point out, and I'm kind of leaving up to electricians and subject matter experts on this, is the this generator has an 8,500 watt starting wattage and 5,500 continuous, which means if you have a device like a refrigerator or something that has a motor that requires a little more wattage to get kicking up and rolling, it's going to draw more power. Once the compressor's running in that fridge, you're not going to need all of that wattage, and it'll throttle back down. But you need that starting wattage, that higher starting wattage, to get things rolling and get things moving. Is this generator is it meant to run the whole house? No. Is it meant for emergency purposes like a storm and keeping your fridge and freezer from thawing out completely? Yeah, that's its purpose. It might give you some heat. Be careful if you're running a heat pump or a furnace or anything like that, because these aren't necessarily regulated on their power output, so you might get little peaks and valleys, and your HVAC systems aren't necessarily too happy when they get those peaks and valleys in the power output or what they're taking in, and so if you're looking for short term, try not to run your HVAC system from your house on one of these backup generators. Plus, you really need to pay attention to how you're hooking this backup generator to the house. You can't just plug it in and expect it to work. What are you plugging it into? Are you plugging it into? You plug appliances into this. That's what this is designed to do. You plug appliances into this generator. You don't necessarily plug it into your house. All right. So here's one of the first things I found when I did the teardown. This is a spark plug that came with the unit with a replacement kit. Here's the one I just pulled out of the generator. Different sizes. It's okay. You know what? It is what it is. If this new spark plug doesn't go in, this one's not too bad. It's just a little dirty and oily, but I'm guessing that's because that carburetor was followed up. If you really wanted to get after it, you would wipe it down. If there's, I can feel there's some gas and some oil on it. It'll work. A lot of that'll burn off and it'll clean up over time. It's a 2-stroke generator. It's not, not a top fuel dragster. So, your spark plug condition is not the end all be all of things. So while I'd like to replace that spark plug today, I'm not going to stop this on behalf of going to, your local auto parts store and getting a new spark plug. I'll just throw that one into the parts bin. If I need it for something else, we'll use it for something else. And again, this spark plug socket is designed to help you get something like this in here. Don't want to over torque it, just get it in there, snug it up. But because it has that rubber gasket in there, it's not going to want to come out all that easy, so you might just have to get on it with a pair of pliers and coax it out of there. But it's meant to stick to the spark plug, and that's exactly what it's doing. So it's doing its job. They're handy, they're not expensive. Again, get that down to your local auto parts store. Not going to be all that much. Alright, we're back on our setup. We're going to get our
our new carburetor put on here. A couple things to pay attention to are these gaskets. I cleaned the old gasket off, but you want to make sure that you're matching up your gaskets with your carburetor. So you can see this one's the intake carburetor, or intake gasket, intake side. It's a little bit bigger. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I hit it backwards. You can fit that choke plate through without interference, no problem. This side is the engine side, and it has an indexing spot right down here where that matches up to a little dimple that's on the intake manifold. So you want to make sure that those are lined up when you put the carburetor back on. We'll get our spring and our throttle lever hooked back in to the top here to our throttle plate. Slide it in there. There's a trick, because you're going to have an issue trying to line everything up and not have that gasket slip. So just slip your bolts through, your mounting bolts, and get them in there, and then you can kind of feed it into the body of that intake manifold, and you know, set it in there so it indexes on that indexing point. Gently snug it down. Again, you're not looking to torque the thing down to next Tuesday. Just give it a little bit of tightness. All right, it's on there. Pretty good action. You just want to make sure that's not bound up or anything, that it'll operate the way it should. Okay, choke's pretty clear and in the way. We're going to, got a little gas in there still. We'll drain this out. We're going to put the fuel filter in the middle just to catch any crap. All we have to do is cut that, put the fuel filter in, and put it back in. This fuel line looks like it's pretty good condition. It's got a little oxidation on the surface, but all in all, there's no cracks, so it's not damaged. So we'll keep that other piece of fuel line for a future project. We'll move back over to the bench here, and I'll be right back. All right, came back from the bench, got the fuel line fit up. Put that inline fuel filter on there. When you put them on, they're kind of pressed together. There's a small side and a big side. The big side is your downstream side. So that's, you know, it is unidirectional. It will flow backwards, but in order to make the filter work right, you want to run that way. So we can get this guy fit onto our fuel line. Get nice and snug down there. Pinch the clamp and get it down in place so that we are on our intake for our fuel. So I want to make sure that when we're done, this guy's not going to jump off, and we're not going to have fuel leaking around a hot generator, and we're not going to create a fire anywhere. So I think at this point we're ready to set the tank back on the top and get some fuel flowing through this guy and see if we can't get it started. Let's go ahead and set the tank back up on top. We're just going to set it there temporarily. We're not going to bolt it down yet. Now, we don't have everything hooked back up yet. We still have our air filter mount plate. We will hook that back up, hook it all back up to our carburetor. Get everything squared away at the end of the day before we call it complete with this job. We just want to do some testing here. Make sure this guy works. Alright, fuel's turned on, and we'll give it a couple pulls and see if we can't get this guy started.
what do you know, just like that, it was that carburetor, and unfortunately, it's not a very user serviceable carb. So let's go ahead and turn our fuel back off. We're gonna get everything buttoned back up and put back together. All right, let's get the cover back on here. Oh, you know what? We have a little bit of gasket left on the back of this guy. Fish it back through to get the rest of that gasket off there. Scrape the rest of that gasket off. Get our gasket put on here. Mount it up. Set that over the top of our, we have our choke lever on the top of our carburetor. Does have to set over the top of that, because our choke will go in there. Get those in there. Get the nut to put back on. Make sure we have the right one. Get everything put back together here. This should go together pretty easy at this point. Remember what size socket we had in there. Make sure that I'm putting the right ones in the right places. Yeah, those guys don't fit. A little bit of hardware going back and forth. Trying to make sure that you always get the right hardware in the right locations and you get it reassembled. You just didn't want to start right away, but they'll get in there. There they go. Alright, that's happy. Alright. That's reaffixed. Let's put our choke lever on the top. And this simply went down through the hole over the top of our choke lever. So choke operates nice and clean and clear. We have our old air filter. And since the package came with a new one, we'll put the new one on. New one just sits in just like that. And our air filter will fit over the top. Air filter cover will fit over the top just like that. And let's get the right socket head on there. The other side. And there so I can see it. There we go. Alright. That's plastic, so you don't want to snug that down too much. You know, when we fired it up without even the choke on. So that's good news. The only other part we have left is this little plastic guard. And I'll pop that guy back on. Get that ready. And we'll call this a done deal. I think, all in all, this repair, it was a little bit more involved than we thought, but that doesn't mean it's not something that any of you guys can do. It was quite easy once we really got into it and looked at it, realized what we were up against. We experimented a little bit, played it a little bit, figured out that if we bought a replacement for a consumable part, we were able to get this guy fired up
almost right away. You know, there was little to no hesitation on getting this carburetor put back on and getting this engine rehabbed to where it was for our friend, so that when their power does go out, they're able to have that backup power for their appliances, maybe a well pump. Again, we're not looking to run the whole house on this guy. It's too small. Consult you'll talk to your local electrical utility and consult an electrician before you hook up anything to your house. You never want to hook one of these up to your house without going through a licensed electrician. Don't ever backfeed through your dryer. Don't hook it up that way. God forbid. You know, you got your linemen, those folks working and spending all that hard time getting the power restored for you, and you've got power feeding back through the system. You don't mean to hurt anybody, but God forbid you don't disengage your power, and you could shock a lineman really bad. You can kill them, and you don't want that on your conscience at the end of the day. So, all right, we'll get this guy fired up. We'll open the door up, and we'll get wrapped up here. All right, everything's back together. Let's get it fired up, and let's let it run for a minute or two here. Make sure everything's happy. Uh-oh. Did we just run out of gas? We may have just run out of gas. I didn't have... Oh, you know what? That's what we did. Again, we forgot to open that vent on the fuel. I bet you, because we didn't open the vent, it just starved itself out of gas. Oh yeah, it's drinking. Let's fire it back up. Let's try it again. Now, I hooked the light that I was using, hooked that up. Great little draw. I'll grab an angle grinder too. I want to make sure that everything's pumping out pretty well, so we'll fire that up once we get her started up here again. But forgot to open that vent, and it's going to turn off every time. You're trying. Getting there. Ran it dry. You know what we did? Haha. Gotta remember, we forgot to turn the fuel back on. That'll do it every time. Sorry about that. Battery died when I was starting her back up. So all in all, here we are, a couple days later, a little frustration, a little researching, and we're back up to a nice running generator for our friend. We'll take it back to him, let him have that backup power when they want it. Last thing we're going to do before we close this out, we're going to turn this valve back off. We're going to run it dry. We'll go ahead and close the vent. Because you don't want to, well, one, you definitely don't want to transport it with fuel in that carburetor. But 2, you don't want to leave it with fuel in that carburetor because it's going to get old, it's going to get stale, and it won't run very well on old gas. So we'll run it dry and let it shut itself off. So with that, thank you for joining us today. Remember to like and subscribe, and join us for our next video. We'll see what other projects our friends have waiting for us.